No one knows the true origin of life. Let's just start there. It's the most honest answer. Anyone who tells you they know for sure is either guessing or selling something. And we have clues. We have some very smart ideas. We have experiments that show us what might be possible. But we don't have a time machine. We can't go back 4 billion years to watch the show. So what we have is a great mystery. It's maybe the biggest mystery of all. Where did we come from? Not our parents or our ancestors, but the very first use. The first twitch of life on a dead rock. To even begin to guess, we have to imagine what Earth was like back then. Forget green fields and blue oceans. Forget air you could breathe. The early Earth was a nightmare, a hot, violent, chaotic place. Imagine a planet-sized construction site. It was just a ball of hot rock, slowly cooling down. Volcanoes were everywhere. They weren't just mountains that erupted now and then. They were giant cracks in the planet's skin, constantly spewing out gas and lava. This gas formed the first atmosphere. It was not our atmosphere. There was no oxygen. It was full of things like water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and maybe some methane and ammonia. It was a thick, heavy, toxic blanket. The sun was weaker than it is today, but the radiation was brutal. There was no ozone layer to protect the surface. The sun's ultraviolet rays baked the planet. And lightning was constant. Huge storms raged in that thick, soupy atmosphere, zapping the surface and the primitive oceans. And then there was the stuff from space. The early solar system was a shooting gallery. Asteroids and comets hit the Earth all the time. This was not a gentle rain. These were massive impacts that could boil the oceans and melt the crust. But they also delivered things. They were like cosmic delivery trucks, dropping off water and organic molecules. So that's the stage, a hot volcanic rock, covered in a shallow, warm, chemical-rich ocean. Under a thick, toxic sky zapped by lightning and radiation and bombarded by space rocks. It doesn't sound like a nice place to live, but it might have been the perfect place to start. It had three key things: energy, chemicals, and water. Life, as we know it, is basically just a clever bag of chemistry. And all chemistry starts with building blocks. The building blocks of life are called organic molecules. Things like amino acids, which build proteins, and nucleotides, which build DNA and RNA, and lipids, which are fatty molecules that build cell walls. These are not life itself. An amino acid is no more alive than a single brick is a house, but you can't build the house without the bricks. So the first big question is, where did the bricks come from? How do you get complex organic molecules on a dead planet? For a long time, people thought this was the real miracle. They assumed these chemicals could only be made by living things. Then, in the 1950s, a couple of scientists named Stanley Miller and Miller-Urey did a famous experiment. They tried to build a little version of early Earth in a lab. They took a glass flask and filled it with the gases they thought were in the early atmosphere. Methane, ammonia, hydrogen. They added water to be the ocean. Then they zapped it with electric sparks to be the lightning. They just let this sterile, lifeless chemical soup run for a week. When they checked the water, they found something amazing. It had turned a murky brown, and in that brown goo were amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. They had created the bricks of life from scratch, using nothing but simple chemicals and a bit of energy. This was a huge deal. It showed that the building blocks of life could form naturally. They weren't magical, they were just a normal result of chemistry on a planet like the early Earth. Since then, other experiments have made all sorts of other building blocks, including the components of DNA and RNA. It seems that the early oceans were probably a warm, dilute soup of these molecules. A primordial soup. But there's another idea too. What if the bricks weren't made here? What if they were delivered? We know that asteroids and comets hit the Earth all the time back then. And when we study meteorites that have fallen to Earth today, we find they are full of organic molecules. We found amino acids, sugars, and other complex carbon compounds inside these rocks from space. Some of them are the same ones used by life on Earth, so it's possible that Earth got its starting materials through cosmic delivery. This idea is called panspermia, not the idea that life itself flew here, but that the raw ingredients did. Most likely it was both. Earth was probably making its own organic molecules in its oceans and atmosphere, and it was getting a steady supply delivered from space. So the planet was stocked, the pantry was full of all the right ingredients, but ingredients don't make a cake. You can have flour, sugar, and eggs on your counter for 1,000,000 years. They will never spontaneously bake themselves into a cake. You need something more. You need a process. You need to take the simple bricks and assemble them into something complex, something that does a job. This is the next big step, and it's a much harder problem. It's the problem of abiogenesis. Biogenesis means life from non-life. It's the jump from a soup of chemicals to the first living thing. This is where the real mystery lies, and this is where the arguments start. We have all these little molecules, the monomers. We need to link them together into long chains, the polymers. Amino acids need to link up to form proteins. Nucleotides need to link up to form RNA or DNA. This doesn't happen easily in a big ocean. The water tends to break the chains apart, not help them form. So maybe it didn't happen in the open ocean. Maybe it happened on a surface. Imagine wet clay on the edge of a pond. Clay has a very specific mineral structure, with layers of atoms that can attract and hold other molecules. These clay surfaces could have acted like a template or a chemical workbench. The little monomers would stick to the clay, concentrating them in one place. The clay's mineral surface could have even helped them link together, forming the first polymers. The water would wash over them, then retreat, and the sun would bake them, providing the energy to forge these chemical bonds. It's a plausible idea, a cycle of wet and dry on a mineral surface. Another place it could have happened is at the bottom of the ocean. At deep-sea hydrothermal vents, these are cracks in the seafloor where superheated, chemical-rich water from inside the Earth gushes out into the cold ocean. They are like underwater chemical factories. The vents are lined with minerals, especially iron and sulfur. These minerals could have acted as catalysts, speeding up chemical reactions. The steady flow of chemicals and energy from the vent could have powered the creation of long polymer chains. These vents create tiny pores in the rock, little compartments where chemicals could be concentrated and react with each other. It's like a natural chemical reactor. So we have some good ideas for how to get the first long molecules. Let's say we have them. We have proteins, and we have something like RNA or DNA. Now what? We have a pile of parts. A living thing needs to do two main things. It needs to have a metabolism, and it needs to be able to replicate. Metabolism is just a word for staying alive. It's the process of taking in energy and materials from your environment and using them to build yourself and run your systems. It's like the engine of a car. Replication is making copies of yourself. It's passing on your information to the next generation. It's like the blueprints for the car, so the factory can make more. Which came first, the engine or the blueprints? The metabolism or the genetics? This is one of the biggest debates in origin of life research. It's the chicken and egg problem. In our bodies, it takes a whole team. DNA holds the blueprints. But DNA is just a library. It can't do anything on its own. To read the blueprints and build things, it needs proteins. Proteins are the workers. They are enzymes that make reactions happen. They build the cell. But to make the right proteins, you need the instructions from the DNA. So DNA needs proteins, and proteins need DNA. They are completely dependent on each other. It's hard to imagine how such a complex system could have started all at once. It's too much to ask. This is where RNA comes in. RNA is the less famous cousin of DNA. In our cells, it mostly acts as a messenger, carrying instructions from the DNA to the protein-building machinery. But RNA is special. It's more versatile than DNA. The big idea is called the RNA World hypothesis. It suggests that the first life was based not on DNA and proteins, but on RNA alone. Why? Because RNA can do both jobs. It can store information, like DNA. The sequence of its nucleotides can be a blueprint. But RNA can also fold up into complex three-dimensional shapes, just like a protein. And when it folds up, it can act as an enzyme, a catalyst. These RNA enzymes are called ribozymes. This was a revolutionary discovery. It meant that you didn't need DNA and proteins to get started. You could have a single molecule RNA that was both the blueprint and the builder. It could store the instructions for making a copy of itself, and it could perform the chemical work of actually making the copy. So picture this. In that primordial soup or on that clay surface or near that deep sea vent, an RNA molecule forms by chance. It's not just any RNA molecule. It has a sequence that allows it to attract other, smaller RNA building blocks and stitch them together. It makes a copy of itself. Now there are 2, then 4, then 8. This is the beginning of replication. The beginning of heredity. Of course, the copying process wouldn't be perfect. There would be mistakes, mutations. Most mistakes would result in a molecule that didn't work anymore. It would be a dead end. But every now and then, a mistake might create a new RNA molecule that was even better at copying itself. Maybe it was faster, or more stable, or it could use the available building blocks more efficiently. This is natural selection. In a chemical form, the RNA molecules that were better at replicating would make more copies of themselves. The ones that were worse would fade away. Over millions of years, this chemical evolution would favor more and more complex and efficient RNA molecules. Some might evolve the ability to build other useful molecules, maybe one evolved to build a protective coating for itself. The RNA world is a very powerful and popular idea. It solves the chicken and egg problem of DNA and proteins. It provides a starting point, a first step on the ladder of complexity. Life could have started as a self-replicating RNA system. Later on, this system would have outsourced its jobs. It would have evolved to use DNA for information storage, because DNA is more stable, a better library, and it would have evolved to use proteins as its main workers, because proteins are much more versatile and efficient enzymes than RNA. And RNA was the jack of all trades that got things started, but later, life found specialists for the jobs. But not everyone is convinced. Some scientists think the RNA world has big problems. RNA itself is a complex and fragile molecule. It's hard to make the building blocks for it under early Earth conditions. And it's even harder to get them to link up properly. Maybe they say, we're looking at the wrong thing. Maybe the blueprints weren't the first thing, maybe the engine was. This is the metabolism first idea. The argument here is that life didn't start with a special replicating molecule like RNA. It started as a self-sustaining chemical reaction, a network of reactions, a primitive metabolism. Remember those hydrothermal vents? They are constantly spewing out simple chemicals like hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide. The minerals on the surface of the vents, like iron sulfide, can act as catalysts. In this environment, you could get a cycle of chemical reactions going. The chemicals from the vent would react on the mineral surfaces, producing more complex molecules. These new molecules would then take part in other reactions, creating a whole network. A self-sustaining chemical loop. Think of it like a whirlpool. A whirlpool isn't a thing. It's a stable pattern that maintains itself as long as water is flowing through it. A metabolic cycle could be like that. It's not a physical object, but a persistent process. As long as there was a steady supply of energy and simple chemicals from the vent, the cycle would just keep running, churning out more complex molecules. It wouldn't have genes or replication in the way we think of it. It would just grow by expanding the network of reactions. In this view, the little pores and compartments in the rocks around the vents are crucial. They act as primitive cells holding the chemical reactions together in one place. Only later, once this robust metabolism was established, would it develop a way to record its information. It would eventually invent molecules like RNA to serve as a memory, a way to make the system more robust and heritable. So in this model, genetics is a late addition. Life starts as a rock-powered chemical engine, and the blueprints come later. So we have two competing camps. Genetics first with the RNA world, or metabolism first with self-sustaining chemical cycles on mineral surfaces. Both have good points, both have big problems and unanswered questions. Maybe they're both partly right. Maybe life started with some kind of simple interaction between the two. Maybe the first replicators were very simple molecules that relied on a pre-existing metabolic cycle for their energy and building blocks. The truth could be a mix of both ideas. There's one more piece we need, a crucial piece. Life isn't just a bunch of chemicals floating around. It's contained. Every living thing we know of is made of cells. A cell is a little bag. It has an inside and an outside. This boundary, the cell membrane, is incredibly important. It keeps all the important life chemicals together in one place so they can react with each other and not just drift away. It also protects them from the outside world, and it allows the cell to control what comes in and what goes out. It's an individual. So where did the first bag come from? The first container? This might actually be the easiest part of the puzzle. The molecules that make up cell membranes are lipids. They are fatty molecules. One end of a lipid molecule is attracted to water, and the other end is repelled by it. When you put lipids in water, they spontaneously arrange themselves to hide their water-hating tails. They form little spheres, called micelles or vesicles. They create a little bag, a hollow ball with a fatty wall. An inside and an outside. These are called protocells, and they form all the time, naturally. You don't need any special instructions or enzymes. You just need lipids and water. We found lipids on meteorites. They can be synthesized in Miller-Urey type experiments. So the early oceans were probably full of these little fatty bubbles. Now imagine one of these protocells forming in a place where there are self-replicating RNA molecules. By sheer chance, it might trap a few of these RNA strands inside. Now you have something really interesting. You have a replicating system, the RNA, inside a container, the lipid vesicle. This is a huge step forward. The protocell keeps the RNA and its copies together. If one of the RNA molecules mutates and learns to do something useful, like help build more lipids for the cell wall, then that protocell will have an advantage. It will be more stable, or maybe it will grow and divide more easily. Its offspring, the new protocells it splits into, will inherit that useful RNA. Natural selection can now act on the whole package, the protocell as a whole. This is the beginning of a true cell. An individual that competes with other individuals, so we can start to see a possible story emerge. It's a blurry story, and we don't know the order of events, but the pieces are there. You start on a chaotic early Earth, with water, energy, and simple chemicals. These simple chemicals, either made on Earth or delivered by comets, form the basic building blocks of life amino acids, nucleotides, lipids. These building blocks link together into long chains, polymers, maybe on clay surfaces, maybe in hydrothermal vents. You get primitive proteins and RNA. Now, we have the big split. Maybe a special RNA molecule appears that can make copies of itself, starting an RNA world of chemical evolution. Or maybe a self-sustaining metabolic cycle gets going first on mineral surfaces. At some point, fatty lipid molecules in the water form bubbles, protocells. These bubbles trap the replicating molecules or the metabolic cycles inside. Now you have a true individual, a protocell with some kind of primitive genetics and metabolism separated from the outside world. Natural selection takes over, favoring the protocells that are better at surviving and reproducing. Over millions and millions of years, these simple protocells become more complex. The genetic system evolves to use DNA because it's a more reliable storage medium. The catalytic work is taken over by proteins because they are better at it. The cell gets better at controlling its internal environment and extracting energy from its surroundings. Eventually, one of these cell lines was so successful that it outcompeted all the others. Or maybe all the others just died out in some planetary catastrophe. Whatever the reason, this one successful lineage is the ancestor of all life that exists today. We call this ancestor Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Luca was not the first living thing. There were probably many different forms of early life, many different experiments that failed. And Luca is just the one whose descendants survived. It's the great grandmother of every living thing on Earth, from the bacteria in your gut to the tallest redwood tree to you. By comparing the genes of all living things today, we can get an idea of what Luca might have been like. We can see which genes are shared by all three domains of life bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. These shared genes must have come from Luca. It seems Luca was a sophisticated little microbe. It already had DNA, RNA, and proteins. It had a complex metabolism. It was already a fully fledged cell. It likely lived in a hot, oxygen-free environment like a deep-sea vent. The journey from the first twitch of chemistry to Luca was probably as long and complex as the journey from Luca to us. So, is that the true origin of life? It's a story. It's the best story we can build from the evidence we have. It's a scientific story based on chemistry, geology, and biology. Every step of it is plausible, and many parts of it are supported by experiments. But there are still huge gaps. We don't know for sure how the first polymers formed. We don't know if it was metabolism first or genetics first. We don't know what the environment was that brought all these pieces together. The jump from a collection of interacting molecules to a reproducing, evolving cell is still a black box. There are other ideas, of course. Some people still hold on to the idea of panspermia, but in a stronger form. Not just the delivery of ingredients, but the delivery of life itself. The idea that a microbe or a spore traveled through space from another planet, maybe Mars, and seeded life on Earth. This is possible. We know that rocks can be blasted off planets by asteroid impacts, and some microbes are tough enough to survive a journey through space. But it doesn't solve the origin problem, it just moves it to another planet. How did life start there? And then there are non-scientific explanations. The idea that life was created by a supernatural being, a god. This is a matter of faith. It's a belief. It's not a scientific hypothesis because it can't be tested. Science is limited to looking for natural explanations for natural phenomena. It can tell us what is possible within the laws of physics and chemistry. It can't say anything, one way or the other, about things outside of that. So we come back to the beginning. We don't know the true origin of life. What we have is a frontier of science, a giant, fascinating puzzle. We are chipping away at the edges. With every new experiment in the lab, with every new discovery about the Earth's geology, with every new microbe we find in an extreme environment, we get another clue. We learn a little more about what is possible. It's a humbling question. It connects us to the most basic properties of our planet and the universe. It reminds us that we are the result of an unimaginably long and contingent chain of events. A 4 billion-year-old story of chemistry and chance, and the fact that we don't know the beginning of the story doesn't make it less amazing. It makes it more so. The search for the answer is part of what it means to be a living thing that can look back and ask, how did I get here? We are the universe's way of trying to understand itself, and the search goes on.